Welcome back to Thriving with ADHD on Inspired Podcast. I'm your host, Denise Santangelo. And today we're pulling back the curtain on what happens when ADHD isn't just an individual diagnosis, but the very fabric of your family dynamic. I'm an adult living with ADHD, as you all know, but I am also a parent of a child with it and a clinician that deals with this every day as an ADHD specialist. And you know, I get what my spouse goes through at times as he unconditionally loves me and my beautiful, fun, but sometimes exhausting neurotype. So today we're going to talk about how to stop merely surviving the chaos of our lives and start genuinely thriving within it. So let's start with the parenting piece. And, there's a unique psychological landscape that unfolds when you have ADHD and you're raising a child with ADHD, right? In many ways, it feels like looking into a mirror, that reflects your rawest, most vulnerable traits right back at you. And when my child loses their shoes for the fourth time in a single morning or experiences an intense emotional crash, right? Because a transition happened too quickly or something, and that used to happen when, they were very little, but it triggers something deep inside me. And it triggers the ghost of my own childhood. The times when I was told you're too much or you're being too sensitive or just not trying hard enough. And lucky for me, I did not experience that from my parents or my family, but I certainly heard that, message from the outside world. But here's where the shift happens because, I know what it feels like from the inside. And I can offer something radical, immediate, unconditional validation. When they're melting down because their brain cannot process a sudden shift in plans, I don't see a behavioral problem. I see an overloaded of executive function network. And, I see that because this is my work. But I want you to see that when you are parenting a kiddo with ADHD, whether or not you yourself have it, you need to be able to see that that is not a kid being a brat. It's not a kid being, unrelenting. Listen, sometimes it can be, you can have ADHD and also have some behavioral stuff you go through. Those two things can be, exist in your world. But when you know that this is more of one of those moments where we're looking at an overloaded executive function network, I want you to be able to look them in the eyes and say, I know exactly how loud your world feels right now. Let's sit in the quiet together. Thriving as an ADHD parent means leveraging your empathy as a superpower. We know that standard behavior charts and rigid punishment reward systems often break neurodivergent spirits, right? Instead, we co-create systems. We don't fight the dopamine chase. We partner with it, right? We turn tidying up into like a high stakes timed game. We use visual schedules, not like, necessarily like you're living in like a strict prison, right? Where like we have to use this exactly as it is, right? But we use these kinds of things as like gentle guardrails, right? For our wandering minds. And that's the difference here. So you want to be able to embrace that creative, beautiful mind, but also give it those guardrails. So that's what we're going to really continue to talk about in these podcasts is how to be able to kind of just go with that beautiful sense of self rather than constantly trying to change it, stop it, revamp it, and conform it, because that is definitely not what we want to do. Now, let's talk about marriage when, two ADHDers pair. And that happens. And interestingly, or not so interestingly, because, we all know the phrase opposites attract, usually a hyperactive impulsive pairs the inattentive one. So it's interesting because, they both are working with ADHD, just two very different kinds. So, what does this look like? What happens when two ADHD brains share a life and a bank account and a calendar? It means life is never ever boring. We synergize beautifully when it comes to spontaneity, creative problem solving, and deep late night conversations about the universe. We understand each other's need to suddenly rearrange the entire living room at 10 p.m. Uh, because the current layout, just feels like stale. And this is the funny part of where, like, my husband is definitely, I think, inherited some ADHD symptoms because he will totally roll with me on those things. But he is not ADHD in any other way. But that is where he becomes ADHD by spousal influences. But there is a beautiful absence of judgment when one of us forgets why they walked into a room and the other one is right there with you, like, yeah, I don't know. Let's walk back out together and see if we figure it out. So it can really be great. But it also means our vulnerabilities can collide too. So when both partners struggle with working memory or time blindness, which we talk about a lot on this, or emotional regulation, a small miscommunication can feel incredibly destabilizing. And listen, if I'm running low on cognitive bandwidth and my spouse drops the ball in an administrative task, it's real easy for like resentment to creep in. And that's not cool. So thriving in an ADHD squared relationship requires moving away from the traditional relationship expectations. And, we had to stop assigning value judgments to tasks. The person who handles the bills isn't the responsible one. Okay. They're simply the one who currently has the system in place to manage the bill pay. And we rely heavily on externalizing our relationship infrastructure. If it isn't on the shared digital calendar with 3 distinct alerts, it simply doesn't exist in our reality. And that is important to continue. We practice what I like to call is like dopamine swapping. It's one of us is completely paralyzed by a mundane task like folding laundry, and the other steps in to provide body doubling, right? Just sitting in the room talking to help bring that baseline stimulation up. Where this goes a really long way in my house, I really just love to have my husband in the room when I am writing a paper. And he's like wonderful. He will literally stay up till like 3 o'clock in the morning, like just sitting there, like watching the computer or like a show, even though he is outrageously tired, because I need him to just like sit there and body double. Because if he's sleeping, one, I build resentment, and two, I just like have a really hard time staying focused and keeping on the task. So it's an incredible thing when your partner either has ADHD and can body double and get mutual help from it, or is just a really good spouse like mine and just does it because they know you need it. So we protect each other's peace. We know how fragile it can be. So when you're paired with another ADHD or you've just got a really caring, loving spouse like I do, you work together with that. Now, through my work in the clinical mental health field and my own lived experience, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what it takes to find stability when your internal environment's constantly shifting. In the digital age, it is so easy for neurodivergent individuals to seek external validation, to soothe that inner anxiety. But true thriving in a multi-ADHD household comes down to building a stable internal anchor. So it's about teaching our children, our partners, and most importantly, ourselves, that our worth is completely decoupled from our productivity or our executive functioning on any given day. But we can't keep those two things together exclusively. A day where we miss an appointment or it's not a failed day. It's simply a day where our environment outpaced our cognitive capacity, and that's okay. So when we stop treating our ADHD as a series of errors to be corrected and start treating it as a dynamic landscape to be navigated, then the entire energy of the home changes. The tension drops. The laughter returns. We step out of survival mode and into a space of like shared rhythm. So if you're listening to this today from a chaotic kitchen, feeling overwhelmed by your own mind, your child's intense energy, or the friction in your relationship, take a deep breath right now and give yourself permission to drop the standard playbook. You do not have to run your life, your parenting, or your marriage the way your neurotypical society tells you to. Build the weird systems that work for you, man. Laugh at the cold coffee that sits on the counter for like the third day in the row. Celebrate the intense hyperfixations. Lean into the deep empathy that only your brain can generate. You are not too much. You are exactly enough. Running on a brilliant frequency. So thanks for tuning in to Thriving with ADHD tonight. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with a loved one or leave a review. It helps our community grow. And until next time, keep embracing the rhythm of your own mind. Take care. Bye.